Welcome to What Kind of Asian Are You? A podcast featuring conversations about being Asian. We are going to highlight, amplify, and validate Asian voices through deep conversations with those in the diaspora making a difference and being their best selves. I'm your host, Kyle. Hello, everybody. This is Kyle from What Kind of Asian Are You podcast. Welcome to another episode. This is a podcast where we feature conversations about being Asian, and we talk to people from the diaspora, cool Asians doing their thing, all that fun stuff. And today it's very special, like usual. We got a great guest for you. And before we bring this person in, I just want to let you guys know if you want to support this podcast, feel free to just keep listening, share with people that you think will enjoy it, and also follow us on Instagram at What Kind of Asian Pod. You'll find content there that's not on the typical audio version of this podcast, and also kind of extra content per se, and get to know the podcast more on the Instagram level. And also make sure to just subscribe to us on your social digital platform per se. So it's your streaming platform, Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to your podcast. And also leave us a review or rating on either Spotify or Apple. Those really help. So give us a 5-star rating and also give us a review on Apple Podcasts. And now, without further ado, I have my guest, and we've been planning this for a while now, and we're very excited to have her on. And I'm gonna let her tell you what she is, who she is, what she's about, and all that fun stuff. Her passion, not necessarily what she does, because I think that kind of question is kind of not necessarily boring, but like people are more than what they do. So in terms of work, so without further ado, we have Julia on the show today. Hi, Julia. How are you doing today?
Hi, Kyle. Thanks for having me. I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Very excited to talk with you because you are my first guest that I'm interviewing after a long break of not recording because I had recorded a huge batch of episodes previously. So
Mhm.
you are the first person I'm recording with again after maybe like 3 months. So kind of rusty, but let's have a good
Nice.
conversation. And I'm hoping for great things, and I'm sure you'll be a great guest. So in terms of who you are, what you're about, and kind of just your introduction, can you just let the audience know kind of your backstory and all that fun stuff, and most importantly, what kind of Asian are you?
Yeah, of course. Honored to be your, uh, you know, new guest, I guess, from this new segment. But yeah, I'm Julia. I live in New York, and I guess just to preface, I do some design and some modeling in New York, and I would define myself as, I guess, a creative, but in this sense, like a dual creative pursuit Asian, which I feel like is pretty uncommon in this, just in the Asian American and Asian space. So I feel like a lot of times when I'm introducing myself, people are kind of like intrigued, like, oh, how did you end up there? And, it goes from there. But yeah, I, in general, just a big fan of, being in the Big Apple, taking advantage of all that is. And that also helps me to pursue my dreams and uh, not always like, what am I saying? I guess just like, in general, just having, enjoying my time there. And yeah, it all just fuels part of like everything that I do.
That's awesome, man. You
Hmm.
you gave us a couple of points I want to touch on. Like you said, oh, you're the creative Asian. So in terms
Hmm.
of growing up, was it always kind of design, modeling? That was kind of what drove you creatively, or it kind of you grew into that? So can you just talk about like how you were creative as a kid till now, and kind of what you do in terms of a career as well?
Hmm. Yeah, so growing up, I grew up in Washington State, and I feel like definitely surrounded a lot through the arts, just what's available at school. There's often, like an art class that you can take or like an after school club. So definitely just immersed in that world helped me to discover my creativity. But even just like down to being at home, when I was in that phase of like loving like anime and manga and all that like a lot of Asian kids I feel like go through. So, naturally, you're like, oh, like I want to learn how to draw, and you start drawing and like imitating your favorite artists. So that's how things got started. But I would say how everything led up to me, pursuing these as actual career paths, didn't even have to necessarily be related to being artistic as a child. It just also lended itself to me like realizing that the traditional path wasn't where I wanted to be. Like I came out of college not really sure of what my passions were at the time. I just heard the phrase marketing a lot and decided that that was something that sounded viable. But once I was in there, I was like, oh, this is all numbers and, more analytical than I was expecting. So as a result of that, decided that actually, I want to move to the Big Apple, move to New York, um, took up this graphic design boot camp course that really just helped me to like get everything together that I needed to transition careers. And yeah, so that was the graphic design part, which also in turn led itself to the modeling part, where because I was in the city and I know listeners can't tell, but I'm Asian, but also like very tall for especially an Asian woman. I'm actually about 6 foot tall, so I think naturally you get the question asked of like, oh, like, are you a basketball player? Are you a model? They just want to know, like, is there something that you do with that height of yours? So as a result, I was kind of just like, it kind of piqued my interest of being like, maybe I should try it and like see what happens. Did my research and, applied to some agencies. And yeah, that's kind of how that all started.
That's great. It seems like everything just happened because of the fact that oh, you decided oh some stuff isn't for me, and then you just explore other avenues, and then things. I don't want to say just drop on your lap, but like one thing led to another kind of thing. And you mentioned a lot like oh, you went to the Big Apple. I'm just always wondering or curious like for Americans because I'm from Canada, so I know about like New York and all that stuff, but it seems like a lot of people in America had this kind of great idealization of the Big Apple. I'm just curious from your perspective what drew like what's Big Apple like that kind of like why was it so alluring or that you'd be like oh I want to go to New York to kind of explore because I assume Washington isn't horrible a place so why do you have to make that big move, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's definitely something I hadn't thought about too much. But now that you mention it, I guess for me, my first big departure from Washington was actually just to the East Coast for school, and I went to school in North Carolina, so being out there, being surrounded by a lot of just like-minded people who are all like, high achieving, wanting to like pursue their dreams, and just in general, I feel like New York is a draw for any sort of career path. So naturally, I feel like when you're on the East Coast, New York is always top of mind for people when it comes to jobs, just like it just feels like the most exciting thing happening. So that's kind of what led me there as well. I did also, when I was in school, do like a little semester away program in New York, which was also very heavily arts and media focused. And I think that experience left a very positive impression where I was like, wow, New York has like so many awesome, like, we went to like all these museums and attended like Broadway shows and plays and like just the food and like there's just so much to do. And having come from Washington, somewhere much smaller, I just quickly realized I'm like, oh, I like love being in the city and I love just like all these exciting things happening. It's just there's like a certain energy that New York has.
So there's definitely an energy. And it's not just what we see on the movies. Like, oh, there's a real energy. It's like if you live there, you can feel it, regardless of how much people are just like. I like New York, but I also hate it. As there are people like there's a love hate relationship. I assume right now you don't necessarily have that, or you have a little bit of that, but you're still enjoying your time in New York per se.
Yeah, that love-hate relationship is very real. I think I'm definitely more on the love spectrum as of now, but what you see in the movies of New York is not what you're going to necessarily get when you visit. I think a lot of people are faced with that once they visit there, and that's why people will be like, "Oh, I like this, but I don't want to live here per se." But I think for me, since I've already lived there now for like going on like 5 years now, you're like, okay, I've kind of been through it all, like know what to expect, so therefore I can like make the most of my time here.
Yeah, and going back to like your journey to modeling from just being in the graphic design kind of career path. So you say it just came upon like, oh, people keep saying, oh, are you a model? You're tall, so you can use your height and per se. But the further research, I assume you will see like a lot of like negatives per se, or like, oh, it's very hard for certain people to break in because modeling is kind of almost a gatekeeping kind of industry to a certain extent of all kind of entertainment industry. So what really made you push like, oh, I should really give it a try? Because I assume the negatives you definitely know because you do your research. What really made it feel worth it to at least try it, even with all those negatives?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting industry. For anyone not in it, there are a lot of definitely negative connotations and just there's kind of like a mystery surrounding it. And I'm not sure if it's just the way that the industry wants to keep it, but it's also just one of those things where, once you're in it, then you learn a lot of things while you're like on the job or like doing just various things that you need and you gain knowledge that way. Even for myself, I going into it like had no idea where to begin, and as most people do, turn to like the internet and just start googling like how do I become a model and New York agencies, and like you just start like starting there. And there are some resources out there, but I would say that it's still pretty limited. If anything, once you talk to somebody, that's really how you like get the insider scoop. Even for me nowadays, when I like meet other models, that's how I like learn more about the industry because you just hear more about their actual experience than like what like a wiki how like article may tell you. So yeah, I decided to go more into it because one, I mean, there was like the height advantage, but nowadays like that's not even a factor that you have to have going into it. They have, it's so diverse that there's just a range of petite to tall to just every type of person. So, but that was a catalyst where for me, I was interested and wanted to try it out. So, yeah, after I signed with like a very small agency at the time and just kind of like dipped my feet into it and realized that actually like it was a lot of fun as well. There's a lot of work behind the scenes, similar to like other parts of the entertainment industry. There's a lot of auditions or castings, and you're probably going to get that like no 99% of the time and like 1% yes. But I feel like if you enjoy it enough and like want it, and then that 1% is worth it because, even through the rejection, like it's like, oh, well, and this worked out. And to me, everything happens for a reason. So I'm like, you know what? Yeah, they wanted me. I like them. And then you like meet them, and generally everyone's very actually friendly when you meet people. There aren't a lot of like catty models or like behaviors out there that's like often seen in media. So yeah, you like meet a lot of just amazing people, have a fun time. Yeah, it's great.
Perfect. It seems like you're not jaded or anything by it yet. So how long have you been doing it, and what are kind of the biggest kind of highlights for you personally in terms of what you have achieved or just what you have experienced within like the career path you chose in with modeling? Because it seems like a lot of people only want to like kind of romanticize like, oh yeah, the modeling is either the really high highs or the low lows that you could encounter. So for you starting out in the industry and also working still trying to get bigger and bigger, what has your experience been so far in terms of the highs and the lows?
Yeah, definitely a roller coaster ride. I would say that some of the highs are just, as I kind of touched on before, meeting different creatives and collaborating with them. Everyone from down to, the guy who's helping with lighting, obviously the photographer, other models, makeup artists. Like, it's just really awesome to see how all these different creative minds come together, and even just to talk to them and like get to know their story and how they got to be there as well is always like very inspiring and motivational for me. So that's like I think one of the biggest like just highs is just always like getting to meet amazing people and like connecting with them through social media and staying in touch and seeing how their journey evolves. Some of the lows, I think, especially for me, since I started modeling about 5 years ago. And at the time, I feel like the industry is very different. There was definitely a very, they call it like straight size. So, meaning you had to be like a very just like tall and skinny model. Like that's what the industry wanted. And so fitting into that was difficult. But now I think that since the industry has just become more just accepting and diverse, that I'm like seeing myself also like get more opportunities and that I would have when I first started. So yeah, like lows were originally like, okay, like maybe this isn't going to work out. Maybe just there was just one thing here and there, but now I feel like that's becoming more of a regular occurrence. I'm like, okay, this is something I can do.
Perfect. And you mentioned like, oh yeah, like initially it wasn't as diverse when you started, and you were kind of like, oh, it could be a low kind of like no, not seeing people pick you, or like kind of just overall like opportunities and seeing your peers. So when you first started, your peers, were they mostly similar background to you, or you were kind of feeling like you were the only one out there kind of trying to pursue this? Because I think the modeling, especially in North America, a lot of focus has always been being white, being blonde, being skinny, being all that stuff. But we could hear you, we could see you. At least right now, I can see you. You don't fit those molds in a certain aspect. So, how has that journey been in terms of being in a space where you might not be the one that they necessarily think about in terms of like kind of opportunities, or just not have other people similar to you be around, like colleagues kind of thing, right?
Hmm. Yeah. It was an interesting space to tap into because, as you said, I think there are, just still a lot of progress to be made, and there has been a lot made. But yeah, coming in originally, and not even, being knowledgeable about the industry, you just feel this sense of like outside, and like you're like, I don't really know what's happening. Am I doing this right? Um, but it's kind of one of those, as with many things in life, right? Like you have to just keep trying and you're gonna like fall, but you have to get up every time and just keep going. And eventually, things will just start like falling into place. So I find that the more that I would just like put myself out there, try, just try every opportunity that came my way, whether it was, like maybe it's a stretch, but I'm like, maybe it could work out. And just kind of being, I guess, putting yourself out there as a representation as well for the industry so that people are aware, like, oh, okay, like there are more than just, as you mentioned, like the blonde, tall, skinny models. And, I think nowadays, um, this ties back to, I guess, marketing too, where they realize that actually consumers aren't all just tall and blonde. So they want to appeal to every customer. And that has a lot of power when people see themselves represented in an ad, on their phone or wherever they're seeing that sort of marketing. So yeah, I'm just glad to be able to help bring some more diversity and color to all that.
Awesome. And I'm just thinking when you were talking, like you mentioned, like, yeah, diversity and all that stuff. So do you feel like in comparison to other kind of entertainment kind of sector, like either music, movies or TV, modeling is one of those sectors where like the diversity in regards to like Asian American representation, has it been a bit slower compared to the other ones, or it has been about the same, or how do you feel about it? Because I feel like we feel so like happy whenever we see, oh, an Asian American person on the movie, or like as a Asian American movie, but we never really think too much about like the modeling industry aspect, because I think a lot of us were like, oh, we don't belong there because we were never there or accepted there in the first place. But I feel like we should be in all spaces that we want to be. So, can you speak to that?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say that in terms of diversification, the modeling industry is it's probably just less known. Like if you see someone in the mass media become popular and they're Asian American, then that is just very public and they're like everywhere, right? They're in the public eye. And that can happen sometimes to models, but at the end of the day, as I've come to realize also living in New York, is there are actually like so many models. You may not even realize, how many there are because there are just so many industries and different representation that, everyone. is trying their hardest and like wanting to do this. So while each person is doing that, it's hard for any one person or like even a group to like really make an impact or like be a public, just like, I guess, like sight to see. So in that sense, I'm just trying to say that like I feel like in the modeling industry, it's definitely been changing, maybe still quietly and not as just like, well known, but yeah, I think it's definitely progressing and people are seeing that visibility, especially as say certain models do become more, they use their social media or their platform to have more of a voice and also even just like maybe jump to say acting or somewhere where they have more exposure, then they can have, more influence that way.
It's nice that you mentioned acting and like other opportunities because I was gonna ask about that. But before we get there, I was wondering like for yourself because like you mentioned there's so many models out there doing their own thing. There's many types of models that they could do that could allow them to make a living in opportunities that you might not really see really right in our forefront, but they're still working and still doing well at it. So for yourself, what kind of modeling are you kind of really hoping to like work on specifically, or is there things that you really want to achieve in terms of the model industry, or you're like finds that I want to be this or that kind of thing.
hmm yeah, I have some goals in mind. We'll see what ends up happening because there is still, as much as I want to be in those positions, a lot of times it is a combination still of having the right opportunity, the right person, just like that luck factor where everything lines up. But I would say that, yeah, like when people picture like a model, it's not necessarily what you might think like you see in the movies or like all that. It's oftentimes just I've met so many different people now, like everyone from like mothers who have children to just like girls who are just starting out and they like haven't gone to even college yet but they want to get into modeling. So there's a whole spectrum of people where it's not limited nowadays to any one type of person. And I would say my goals for the industry, obviously, I guess just like bigger clients is always like fun to work with because bigger clients also means just like more exposure and just more, like I don't know. I also do love sharing my work, so just being able to be like, hey, look at who I got to work with. Like this was a really cool experience. To also like, I think a big part of modeling that people don't always realize is, um, oftentimes, getting each opportunity is really difficult. And so, ideally, if you build that relationship when you're on set with like that client or that, whoever is there, that team, then if they like you enough, they'll just bring you back. It's kind of like with any job where you're like, I hope they like me and that they'll, just like want to hire me next time again. And that makes things a lot easier than every time having to go in and be a new person and like have to like kind of win them over. So I'd like to also get to that phase where I'm, just like, oh, like have like certain clients that they know me, I know them, and we just work together. So that'll just be like a steady, steady relationship.
Awesome. And in terms of what you mentioned, like social media and also acting, those two things I think are other things that you do beyond just the moral aspect. So in regards to those things, do you feel like those things kind of help your modeling, or is the other way around where modeling helps you with social media and acting? Like, or is there kind of like everything is at a play at once? Because at this point, you can't avoid being a social media person in your field because that will help or make it easier for you in the aspect of connecting with people.
hmm Um, I would say that they all kind of go hand in hand. If you're connecting social media to modeling or acting, because I think that social media, particularly, I guess nowadays, it's mainly still Instagram is the way that people connect. In that, that's how you one like can like market yourself outside of like what your agents or other representation might do for you, and just kind of show because a lot of times nowadays it's also not even about just how you look. A lot of jobs and clients they want to see like your personality and what you like to do. Like even like this podcast, like you want to kind of dive deeper and find out what their passions are. And that's kind of what gets them like excited about someone because, you know, just having another pretty face or like another, that's everyone could have that, but they want to like see what stands out about you and like are you a fun person to work with as well. So I think social media is definitely an important factor. And I would say that I was like fairly proficient in social media before getting into it, so maybe that had a factor in helping me with my pursuit as well. But nowadays, definitely there feels like an added sense of like, okay, I should continue posting and sharing and staying connected with these different people that I've met, from just over the years. So there is that, and yeah, for acting, I mean, that's something that I, very just like very peripheral right now. Like I've only like done a few little like extra roles on the side or like a few little commercials here and there, but it's definitely piqued my interest as well because it is very similar to modeling. Um, Obviously, you still need a more like skill, just like how to like emote or like do more of that on camera. And I'm sure there's much more that I can't describe to you, but um, yeah, like, I think that that world is also very, you know, they want good exposure as well probably and still wanna share their work and, just be connected and putting themselves out there.
Would you say that like focusing on social media has taken a lot more time out of you in terms of actual like per se doing modeling specific tasks, or it's kind of where you have kind of accepted, oh, social media, I have to do it, but I also enjoy it, so it's fine? Because I think a lot of times, at least for creators, they're like, oh, I like to do this, but then there's so many other things that could make my project more successful, and I have to tend to them as well. Like for myself, it's like, oh, I wish I could just deal with just recording and talking and having conversation, but then there's kind of growing a following on Instagram, marketing it out so people listen. Kind of, it's not technically really annoying, but it's like takes away from what I really wanted to do in the first place. So, what it would that speak to you, or you kind of have a different mindset about that?
Mm. I actually do feel that way sometimes, that there is a sense of pressure oftentimes of, like, what to post, and, I mean, you know who your following or audience is, so and you wanna present yourself in a certain way online, so there is a bit of pressure where you're like sometimes I find myself kinda, like, waiting and, like, have to think about it before I put anything out there, just because, you don't wanna, like, put something out there that's gonna, you know, get you viewed negatively or, like, just not well, so, um and on top of that, there is an added sense of maybe competition sometimes between just, like, models or just, like, anyone in life, right? Like, I feel like social media sometimes you are since you are probably presenting yourself in the best light possible always, it's not necessarily accurate as to like what you're actually going through and what's happening in your life, which is fine in the sense that you don't want to air out all your bad laundry or dirty laundry out there. But at the same time, I feel like people get this false sense of like, oh, like, you know, you look like you're having such a good time and like and then if they want to compare it to their own lives, like they're like, oh, like what am I doing? And then I don't want people to feel that way. But I feel like sometimes with social media it can get to be that way where people feel the sense of like comparison. Um, and even for me, it's funny because I use my social media mainly just for modeling stuff and just personal life things. So oftentimes when I run into people that I have like I don't talk to regularly per se, they may be like, "Oh, like, are you just modeling now?" And I'm like, "No, I actually still do like freelance design, and that's actually what I do most of the time, but I just don't post about it." And so there's just like you know, that's why social media can have such a strong influence on just like what you want people to think or like what you want people to, how they want you want them to perceive you.
Yeah, I think just need to have a fine balance of like using social media in a way where it helps what you want to do at the end of the day without taking away who you are like as a person. Because I think social media has its good, positive and negative. Because I think we can't say, oh, social media is all toxic or whatever. It could be, but it depends on how you use it. And we talk a lot about like your experience in modeling, and with modeling, a constant thought about it, it's beauty. It's how you look, and it's how um, people perceive attractiveness and all that, or it helps determine what people find attractive or not attractive. So, my question now would be in regards to now that you're in the modeling industry, has your kind of perception of what beauty is or the beauty standards and all that have just that have really changed previous to you getting into the industry, or it kind of help you kind of create a better understanding of what is beauty to you?
Oh yeah, I think definitely before and now in it, I have definitely had a just mindset shift about beauty. Growing up, right, like, and just not being in this space, you see, photos and media, and you consume that, and that's kind of how you build your perception of the world, right, including beauty. And I find that when you're young and you're just receiving that, even when you're not young, even when you're older, sometimes I find that those things are obviously trying to get you to buy something, so they are, trying to put their product or whatever in the best light. And when you're behind the scenes, you realize that actually, like, what you see in the final product is not what you were probably seeing, like, behind the scenes. Like, I'm having like a full team where they're like trying to make me look my best, like hair and makeup. There's, like lighting, there's certain angles, like there's just so much to it that together like combines to create this product of like putting this product in the best light. But in reality, I find that that's obviously not true. Like in general, beauty is just such a also like broad topic and idea that I think that sometimes when people just consume what they see and just think that that's what it is, like that can be dangerous. And I am glad that now, on top of just in general, I think a lot of industry standards is like trying not to Photoshop as much, and like because in the past I think that was like just not as monitored, where like airbrushing or photoshopping was very common. I think now it's a little more like we want to like get people's like real skin, and we want to see how they really look. Um, Even now, most shoots I'm on, like the makeup and stuff is like very natural, just like kind of like amplifying what you already have. And I think that that definitely helps to, just like create a shift as well, where it's not so perfect. Like you can see still like the human side of them and what they look like. And that's beauty at the end of the day.
That's great. And in addition to that, I was just wondering how are you seeing, like, you being Asian American living in the West, you have this beauty standard to uphold to in terms of Western society, but you also still have like a lot of influence from being Asian. So in terms of Asian beauty standard, how do you feel like being in the place that you are, being a model? Like, how do you see, like, do you find yourself like wanting to like being able to be in the middle of those two beauty standards, or how are you looking upon, like, oh, am I fitting into what they consider as beautiful? Because I think we all know that Asian beauty standard and Western beauty standard is really different, and doesn't really connect as much as we think it would. So you being Asian American have both kind of ideas of what beauty is on both sides. How do you feel about it?
Hmm. Um, uh, I would say that for me, it's interesting that because I am Chinese, and American born, and I try to stay in touch with my cultural roots. I still consume a lot of like just Asian media as well, so I'm aware of the beauty standards there. And while growing up here, you also come to learn what the beauty standards are here through media. And I I don't know. I That's kind of an interesting question. I don't know if I'm one or the other. I think that, for many people like myself, where you come from a more like immigrant background, then that you are knowledgeable of both, and you kind of form your own like weird hybrid in the middle of, you are savvy in both. So depending on how, just even for me personally, if I want to portray myself as more of like an Asian beauty, then I'm probably doing something very natural, very, just like nothing too overdone, but still looking like polished as opposed to Western standards. They often want it to look like, like you're almost like a Barbie or something. It's like very like overdone. So depending on that, I think knowing that spectrum, like I can be on whatever part I want, depending on how I'm feeling or like the occasion is. Um, but in terms of like standards, yeah, it's interesting that there is that difference. And I don't know what it is exactly here. I think that there is definitely more leaning towards Western standards, but at the same time, I think since Asia and the influence of just Asian culture in the world now is so, widespread, that actually like it's kind of somewhere in the middle. Like, back in the day, I'm sure it was less that. And nowadays, when I'm on set, if we're just specifically talking about beauty too, then like a lot of the makeup artists I work with, they're using Western products, but they also are like using a lot of like Korean skincare or like various products that they're getting from there. So it's kind of now becoming this interesting, like I guess just like globalizing any sort of beauty, and you know that's all available to anyone now.
Great. And then another thing I was really curious to ask you about, given that you're in the industry of modeling and just kind of being a person that's your job kind of relies you being in the forefront in the public eye kind of thing, where for a lot of kind of Asian kind of families or just Asian American families, being in the forefront isn't very necessarily like looked upon as, oh, it's great, unless it's for something like you're doing for your job. But if your job is actually just to be in the forefront, be like picture perfect, that kind of thing, it's not really thought about. So how has modeling kind of impacted, not necessarily positive or negative, but how has it changed kind of your family dynamic, knowing knowing that you are a model? I'm sure it's not something they thought that you would have done. So, like, did that impact that kind of family dynamic?
Yeah, there's definitely some impact, and it was a process, in that I think originally starting out, as with anyone outside of it again, but especially I think in Asian culture, as you mentioned, that we're not used to putting ourselves like in the forefront. And so I think growing up, particularly my dad, I think he was a little just like skeptical as to like what this all was. And, I think general connotations again is like negative. So it felt very like, oh, like we don't want you just like be selling your image or whatever, like that feels weird. And that was what they thought. But I think for me, I kind of like gradually eased them into it. Even myself, I like gradually eased into the whole thing because, I was still and still do like other things. Like I was still a designer, so it wasn't like I was like, I'm gonna just quit everything and like do this modeling. That would probably freak them out. But the fact that I was like, okay, I'm gonna like be responsible and like still be able to support myself, but also like tack on this other pursuit and just like kind of see what happens. So there's a little less risk involved that way. And then once you start getting into it, and then I like to share my work with my parents, obviously. So I'll like send them like photos from a photo shoot or like a commercial. And I think once they kind of see that come together, they're like, oh, like, okay, it's not all just like, having to be like a Victoria's Secret model or something, and a lot of it is just like, you're like selling like a moisturizer, or you're, like I've done like everything from like grocery store ads to, like just like there's everything in between. And if anything, you look probably fairly normal. So, and then once they realize that, they're like, oh, okay, like it's more than just what they thought it was. So, yeah, I don't think it's changed anything, you know, badly. Like, if anything, they now realizing like, okay, like Julia is the type of person that just, wants to go do it, and she finds a way and does it responsibly as well.
Were they completely like shocked or something when you like kind of show them, oh yeah, I'm a model now, I'm doing these kind of pictures and all that stuff? Were they completely shocked, or they knew it was gonna come based on like your personality and how you were as a kid, or they come out of left field for them?
Mm, for me, I think they knew in the sense that growing up, I've always been like, I liked fashion. I like enjoyed beauty. Out of my sisters, I feel like I was definitely the most like probably likely to become that. So it wasn't out of left field. It was definitely like okay, like, if all the people, probably Julia would do that. So I think that also led them to realize like, okay, this is normal.
That's awesome, and I'm glad that they were like, "Oh yeah, Julia's doing this. We're happy," and and I guess they feel relieved, like, "Oh, you're able to support yourself still because you're still a designer and you're doing everything, and you're happy. That's what's most important." So I'm also happy to hear, like, "Oh yeah, you do the modeling thing, you really like it, but you also don't really treat it as like, oh, I want to make this as my main hustle because I hate my other kind of job." It seems like you enjoy kind of the designing part, or am I assuming wrong?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I keep both going, not just because I have to, but also because I do enjoy design still. That was, as mentioned before, the original reason I moved to New York, and both have their pros and cons. So I think that it's nice to have both still. Oftentimes I've been asked where people are like, "Oh, like if you had to pick one or the other, which one would you choose?" And that's actually like a really hard question for me. I just have a diplomatic answer of actually both because, at the end of the day, like I enjoy both a lot, and, hard to say how long like the modeling will keep going especially. So I'm like, well, design is something that it's a skill set that I can, probably use for a very long time. So don't want to give either of them up. I'm just like taking both as far as I can and seeing what happens.
That's great because there's a very cliche thing. It's like, oh, Asian American diaspora is like, oh, I'm doing this for a side hustle for now, but I really just want to get it to me my main hustle so I can no move away from the job that I originally have, because I think that's very true, but at the same time feel like very kind of tired out as well. I mean, everyone has their own path, but it seems like every time we hear like, oh, another Asian American story is like, yeah, I do this, I really like it, it's my size thing for now, but what I'm really doing full time is like this, but I hate it, I'm trying to move away from it. But it's nice to have a balance of like people like, oh, really enjoying what they do, and it's perfect you found what you really like, when you're young and you can pursue it as much as you want. And before we kind of move into like this uh, um our rapid fire in the say segment, I just want to ask you like some, like, not necessarily modeling tips, but like how do you take better pictures as a person? No, no, you have a lot of experience now, in front of the camera, so must have heard from photographer like how to pose better for them to make it look better. So do you have any that tips or advice for those that are listening that be like, oh, want to up their kind of picture game kind of thing? Not necessarily to take it, but to be like in front of to be posing.
Yeah, posing in front of a camera is difficult for most people, and it for a good reason too. I think that most people's like self-perception of themselves, and then what they see on the camera, they're like, "Oh, that's not what I thought I look like." Um, I think everyone looks great, but I think a big factor is definitely just having confidence, whatever wherever that comes from, like channeling that into your pose or however you're presenting yourself, whether it's how you're dressing, how you're doing your hair, makeup, just trying to feel your best, because I think that that really shows. Um, for me personally too, like when you're taking photos on set, you think that a lot of times it's like, oh, I'm doing like some crazy pose and this is very unnatural. Like at the end of the day, a lot of times they want to see you just feeling comfortable and like you're very like relaxed. If anything, sometimes that like candid, just like you moving in between shot is actually like the best because you weren't trying too hard. So there is that element. If you are posing, um, this is probably a very generic tip, but just like knowing your angles is always helpful. There are ways to make yourself look, you know, a little taller if you turn yourself to the side more, right? Like your profile is just smaller. Things like that can help. Having good lighting is always key. A good natural lighting, like in front of a window or outside, is always ideal. And yeah, just like, I don't know, like don't overthink it, have fun with it. As I said, like confidence, just, take pictures and you'll eventually get the hang of it. And then you'll just, know, like even for myself now, like I take, like if someone's taking a photo of me, like a photographer, I like kind of already know what it's probably going to look like because I just have the image of like, I think I know myself, and now I see you taking it from this angle. It's probably going to turn out like this. So then, yeah, that's also something that as a model, I think you learn because you're like, I've seen myself so many times.
That's awesome. And so you're just saying, you just gotta work with what you have and have fun with it, and always rely on good lighting and good angles. And if anything, nowadays, because camera, film is free essentially, because you can take as many as you want. It's not like
Hmm.
it's there's a finite amount that you can take before it be like, oh, we don't have and we run out. So take as many pictures as you want, and you'll get one that you really appreciate, and you can use that for your profile picture for social media, and get all the likes and stuff. And we talked a lot, and I really appreciate your time. This is it. All the questions for today. Great conversation. Appreciate your time, and happy to know you, and follow your journey from this on forward. I'm really excited for what's yet to come for you, and I can see big things ahead. And yeah, I'm really excited for all the things that you'll be doing and what I'll be getting to see on social media of you. And before we go, can you just let everyone know where they can find you and check out your stuff?
Yeah, of course. My Instagram is at Julia W Zou. So that's where I post a lot of my modeling and just other life updates. But also in terms of like design work, I have my website and it's just juliawzo.com.
Perfect. So this is another episode of What Kind of Asian Are You podcast, a podcast featuring featuring conversations about being Asian. Today we talked to Julia about her life, her stories, a great one. And I wish you nothing but the best, Julia. And thank you for this conversation. And for everyone else listening, thank you for tuning in. And tune in next time for another episode of What Kind of Asian Are You podcast. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and share the podcast on your social media and rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can find us by just searching What Kind of Asian Are You podcast on Google and at What Kind of Asian Pod on Instagram. For the YouTube listeners, make sure to subscribe, like, comment, and ring the notification bell. Last but not least, buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/whatkindofasian. Thank you again, and make sure to tune in next time for another awesome episode.